I'd like to explore with you today how a small group of dedicated neighbors can spark the transformation of an urban community, in particular the Hyde-Jackson Square community of Jamaica Plain. I was born in Ashmont section of Dorchester, and as a young adult, I lived in several predominantly white working-class areas, neighborhoods in Boston. And in the late 70s, I found myself living in Jamaica Plain in a large house with a group of 10 other activist student types. And I knew absolutely nothing about Jamaica Plain. And so one Saturday evening by myself, I decided to take a walk up Center Street, and suddenly I felt like I had entered a foreign country. On the streets, there were lots of people. On the corners, on the stoops, there were lots of cinnamon skin-colored folks hanging out, listening to loud music. Music was blaring out of the stores, the cars, the windows in the homes. The smell of spicy meat seemed to be everywhere, and the smoke of the spicy meat was everywhere on the street. And I'm thinking to myself, is this the United States of America? And so at that moment, I developed an intense curiosity about the Latino culture. And the next 3 years would take me to several Latin American countries where I immersed myself in the language, the culture, the art, the food, the literature. And after a few detours in my life, I was back in Hyde-Jackson Square. I had a couple of young children who were half Latino, and we thought, oh, Hyde-Jackson Square would be a great place to bring up our children. In the late 80s, all hell seemed to break loose in that neighborhood. It seemed to be a perfect storm of disinvestment, economic recession, massive immigration, lots of cocaine, and youth gang violence. And it led the Boston police to labeling this neighborhood as the cocaine capital of New England, and it was considered one of Boston's most dangerous and violent neighborhoods in the city. I remember walking down the street with my one-year-old son in my arms, and on every corner, it seemed, on Center Street that I came to, there were drug dealers there saying, "You looking? You looking?" I witnessed regularly drive-by shootings, beatings over street corner turf for the right to who was going to sell drugs in that corner with baseball bats, with golf clubs. The house next to mine became a crack house. It was a 24/7 operation with all the accompanying noise, drama, and occasional violence. One of my neighbors, Manuela Baez, a Dominican grandmother, was walking on Center Street on a Saturday morning with her family, and she was hit in the back by a stray bullet that paralyzed her for life. One of my other neighbors, Axel Reyes, was coming home from school on the Orange Line, 16-year-old, and he was stabbed to death on the Orange Line in a gang-related incident. And he stumbled out onto the platform at Stony Brook Station, and his sister, who was on another car on the same train, 14 years old, came out, and he died in her arms in the Stony Brook Station. This is a photo of Axel's funeral at Blessed Sacrament Church, and that is his mother who collapsed in grief during the funeral service. So as neighbors, we were absolutely terrified and angry about what was going on, and we had a small initial meeting at the Blessed Sacrament Rectory, and that meeting was interrupted by a firebombing that took place next door, another turf fight over who was going to sell drugs on that corner. But we did regroup, and out of that meeting, the Hyde Square Task Force was born. Now, over the next 2.5 decades, we did a lot of work, and working with other groups and individuals, I think we were able to be quite successful in engaging hundreds of families, mostly Latino families, in community development efforts. Now, what were some of the strategies that we used to get that success? The first one was we had to work intensively with the police. We had a very large meeting at Blessed Sacrament Church, over 300 residents, with Mayor Flynn and Police Commissioner Mickey Roach. And the police were basically making all these excuses of how difficult it was to get the drug dealers off the streets. And so one of my neighbors said to the mayor, "Mr. Mayor, what would happen if there were drug dealers in front of your house in South Boston and your wife called the Boston police? What would happen?" And he said, "Well, they would be removed." And my neighbor said, "That's the level of engagement we want from the police in our neighborhood." Also, the work with the police involved a lot of setting up crime watch groups, but the police had to be our strong partners in the early years particularly. Next was we had to really focus on the youth. We had focus groups with mothers, and at that time, this was like in the late 80s, early 90s, most mothers would not even let their children play out in the backyard because of all the bullets that were flying around. And the number one thing that came through in these focus groups was that they wanted safe and positive activities for their children. Now, we started working with older teens, and we didn't have that much experience because we were just neighbors with no experience in youth development. And we pretty much lost most of those kids they either got killed in gang violence, or they went to jail, or they got deported. But we learned very quickly that we had to start working with younger children at an earlier age and stay with them all the way through high school. And we also wanted to give the youth a vision of going to college and supporting them towards that vision. We've also found that one of the best ways to engage these youth was through Afro-Latin arts, particularly dance and music, and eventually theater were the ways to get them in the door and get them to find their voices. Another major strategy we used was voter registration. When we started, this part of the city had the lowest voter turnout set of precincts in the city, and now it's one of the highest. That took a lot of door-to-door activity, sustained activity over the years, and we found we got a lot more attention from elected officials and a lot more resources when we could show that people in our neighborhood voted. And two major fruits that came out of those efforts were that we had our first state rep, Latino state rep, Jeffrey Sanchez was elected and is still there, and we had our first state senator, Latina Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, they both capitalized on the base of voters that we had developed. Finally, the other strategy we used was to support the local businesses, and one example of that was that there was a proposal to put a huge Kmart in Jackson Square with a massive parking lot, and the small businesses were very fearful that they would be put out of business if that happened, and so it took a lot of energy and a lot of work to go up against a corporation like Kmart, but we were successful in doing that. Now, we had all this success, the streets were vibrant, the streets were safe, but then we ran into another challenge which we hadn't thought of, and that was gentrification. Once the streets were safe and settled and the businesses were flourishing, Hyde-Jackson Square became a mecca for multiculturalism, and it just became a very highly desirable place to live. So a lot of the housing that had been for decades for working Latino families suddenly became luxury condos. And so now we had another challenge, was how do we preserve this Latino identity of the neighborhood? A few years ago, some of the small business owners up there came up with this idea of branding the neighborhood as Boston's Latin Quarter. And that's an idea that's been gaining a lot of attention and attraction. Boston has Chinatown, very vibrant neighborhood. It has the Italian North End. We have the Dudley area, rich in African-American culture and history. We have South Boston with a strong Irish culture. So now we want to put the Boston Latin Quarter into Boston's social fabric. Now, why should the Latin Quarter be in this part of Jamaica Plain? Well, there's a 60-year history of Latino immigration, one wave after the other, that has come and settled there. Thousands of Latinos have come through this neighborhood as their port of entry into the United States. In spite of all the changes, there's still 40% of the folks up there are Spanish-speaking. And of the 125 businesses on Center Street in that area, 65% of them are owned by Latino immigrants. Finally, we have a huge resource up in our neighborhood, the Blessed Sacrament campus. And currently the Hyde Square Task Force is planning to develop a Afro-Latin cultural center in this building, and we're looking for partners right now to do that. And behind the church is the old Catholic grammar school, which the Hyde Square Task Force owns. And in that building, we were able to bring Afro-Latin arts programs for over 1,000 youth each year. It was a struggle to get the Blessed Sacrament Church over a decade ago. And so several groups, including the Hyde Square Task Force, and I got to say the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation and other like-minded groups, we were able to get the whole campus under neighborhood control. So our vision for the Latin Quarter is very simply to make it a dynamic Latino business center that will be a destination place, have certain specialty goods that people can come to and restaurants. And we also want it to be the hub of Afro-Latin arts in the city of Boston. The number of cultural offerings in Afro-Latin arts have not caught up with the population, and we want this to be the center of where these artists will come together. And very simply, we have two strategies. One is just simply to preserve the affordable housing and find opportunities to develop more. And also, we're organizing lots and lots, dozens every year of major cultural events, a lot of them outdoor, that will attract people from JP, will attract people from all over the city, and like I said, be a destination place for tourists. And so if there's hundreds of people coming for cultural events, then they will need places to eat and drink, and we've already seen that that creates an uptick in the local economy, and that's what we're striving for. So I want to invite all of you to come up to the Latin Quarter, shop up there, eat there, and during the warmer months of the year, you'll see many, many different outdoor activities, from outdoor Zumba to salsa, evening salsa parties, to arts exhibitions, to concerts, to outdoor theater, and so please come up there, listen to the rhythms of bachata, merengue, salsa, samba, tango, and get some pastelitos, get some ropa vieja and tostones, and viva Latin Quarter.